The top 100 agents are the best of the best, listing and selling more than any other agent in Australia. These are the practices, actions and beliefs of the most successful agents in Australian real estate. Raw, honest and completely uncut.
Oh, good day, everyone. It's Tim Neary here. I am editor of Real Estate Business and host of the Secrets of the Top 100 Agents podcast. Thanks, as always, for tuning in. On the podcast today, we've got Anton Babkov, who is the CEO of what was REX Software, but is now REX Labs, and Alex Babkov, who is the CTO of the same company. Hello, Alex and Anton, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Tim. Thanks for having us.
You're very welcome. Now, Anton, I think I'll start with you. We're seeing some changes in the industry, and we see that the best agents are those that adapt to those changes. How important do you think it is for agents to be able to diversify successfully?
Yeah, so diversification is an interesting topic. We've talked recently about our expansion to the UK. In the UK, agencies generate something between 20 and 30% of their revenue from secondary sources, so from referrals to cleaning services, referrals to conveyancing services and finance services. In the US, that figure's even higher. So in the US, the figures are 40 to 50% for brokerages. Now, I think that in Australia, our market's been made up somewhat differently than those markets in the UK and the US. Because our predominant business model in Australia has been a real estate agency with 10 to, anywhere between 5 and 15 agents. Now, what we've noticed and what in conversations with companies like REA and some of the sort of the heads of the franchise groups, what we've noticed in those conversations is that the Australian market seems to be shifting to an environment where the US model or the UK model kind of makes a lot more sense. And that model reflects one kind of core business offering with a bunch of agents. And that can happen in one of two contexts. So on the one hand, you have super offices with 40, 50, 60, 100 staff. You have, the core sort of admin service that's happening on the ground, maybe across a number of locations, but it's a centralized service offering, and agents are kind of sitting around the top of that offering. And then on the other hand, you have organizations like One Agency that are providing a similar sort of service, but to individuals. So rather than people operating within a company, you have fully licensed real estate agents operating effectively as sole traders, maybe with 1 or 2 staff, and they're supported by brand assets. Now, what's happening is because the market seems to be shifting in that direction, people in the centre are being squeezed out. So the model where you sort of start with 2 or 3 people, you expand to 10 or 15, and you sort of stay there. Is being eroded by 2 things. 1, commission rates going down to an extent. 2, costs going up. And it's hard for those businesses sitting in the middle to benefit from the economies of scale. So that's a trend that we see happening further and further. But what that sort of means for agents and business owners that are providing agency services on the ground is that we need to look for different areas of revenue where we can capture more revenue, and also where we can start to differentiate our offering. So when you're not thinking about local community as much, and there's this mega office or got this one-man person operating out of home, it becomes a lot more important to think about, 1, revenue, 2, the broader service that you can offer. And that's where things like finance, like conveyancing, like connections, utilities, all of those things can fit into the core service that an agent provides. And I think that going forward, people expect more from their service providers across the board. If you buy an iPhone, you expect music, you expect servicing. Apple's going into vehicle sales. There's been speculation for a number of years. So it's interesting that we sort of see that trend at a macro level in the industry, sort of shifting the dynamic of the operating models in the market, which means that revenue from services is important, but also the broader sort of tech trend of provide more, add more value, that kind of thing. So we think that diversification is really, really critical, and it's important to start looking at partnerships or the capacity to internalize some of those third-party services like finance.
Anton, you make a good point in terms of the squeeze on commissions and the costs going up. And talking about diversifying, how best can agents build a diverse company?
That's a good question. I think all of Anton's points were pretty much in line with my thinking, but I think also that diversification isn't really something that's new to the real estate industry. With the nature of the cyclical
market, it's always been appreciated, and you can see that very clearly by the fact that almost every agency in operation will have both a sales and property management department. I think on the property management side, traditionally agencies have been very good at forming close relationships with service providers purely due to the higher volume of transactions on a lower set of relationships. In the context of that sales space, this hasn't really been something that's been very popular in the Australian market. I think it's largely due to, I guess, the time scale of the relationship. So in sales, it's a 7 or 8 year relationship. With PM, it's a constant situation where you're needing to validate your work to your landlords. And as a result, agencies have typically delivered a higher value of service there. So I think a key way that they can go and deliver more service while at the same time gaining more revenue is essentially moving past that traditional role of marketing and negotiation and finalizing at that transaction point. Go and deal with the moving service, go and deal with the utility connection service, maintain that relationship over an ongoing period and continue providing services even if you're not in a position where you're dealing with that transaction. So maintain that relationship over 5, 6, 7 years and make sure that you're there in that position to not only get the listing again when it comes up for sale, but also to be continuously clipping that ticket and delivering that extra revenue, delivering the extra service while still being able to clip the revenue, I guess. The other thing, I think, in terms of diversification play that wasn't really necessarily covered is starting to decouple a little bit some of your brand value. At the moment, a lot of brand value comes from REA and domain. And every time you advertise your listings, you're driving traffic back to those properties. Find ways to get around that. Do social advertising, drive traffic back to your website.
Yes, I think Alex makes an interesting point. That this idea has been in the market for a long time. People look at there's compare and connect, there's direct connect, so connection services. Some agencies will have partnerships with local conveyancers. But what we see in the market is that there's not really a strong, consolidated, rational approach around building those relationships and how those relationships are managed, and how agencies and agents can use those relationships to nurture their client relationships over a longer period of time in the sales context, but beyond when the contract is signed.
So talking about brand value, when we started the podcast, I said, what was REX Software is now REX Labs. What is REX Labs?
So I'll probably take that one. We started out as a business about 8 years ago. We had a CRM product called REX Software. So that's what we're probably primarily known in the market as. 3 years ago, we released a website as a service product called SiteLoft. That's a sort of a related company. And then in the last 2 years, we released Pocket. In the last few months, we've released Spoke and Hitch. So Spoke is a social media marketing product. Hitch is a referral platform to help agencies sort of look at how they can diversify their revenue streams and provide a broader service to their marketplace. So each of those products kind of has a different value proposition. A REX user doesn't necessarily need to be a Hitch user, doesn't need to be a Spoke user, and so on. So for us, it was we had all these products out in the market, and it was difficult for us to communicate, I guess, how they were all linked together. And for us, REX Labs is a nice kind of glue that helps us hold the other products together. We kind of see ourselves going forward as an innovator for the industry. So represent sort of, I guess, advocating and building tools for agents on the ground. Our agenda is to give as much capability to agents as professionals, to give them as much technology and as much simple access to some of the innovations that are happening in the broader marketplace via the tools that we kind of build. So we kind of, I guess that's the position of Labs, at least as far as it relates to property, is, we really want to innovate from a process standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, for the Australian, the UK industry and the international industry as we sort of go forward over the next few years.
And we'll talk a little bit about your move into the UK a little bit later as well. I'm interested about that. But just before we do, just talking about those two products in particular, Hitch and Spoke, they tie nicely into what we're talking about in terms of the agents diversifying and the need to do that. How have they been received in the industry so far with the market?
Yeah, so I mean, Spoke has had an incredible reception in the market. I think there are a few products that probably do something similar, but nothing that offers the level of control that Spoke does. So Spoke essentially lets you place advertisements for listings, for the agency, for individual agents on social media across both Facebook and Google, which is a pretty unique value proposition in terms of the product. And it lets you drive traffic back to your website. Lets you do some pretty intelligent stuff in terms of being able to remarket, so basically advertise to people who have already seen a particular property, seen your brand before. You might be able to advertise to, say, people who have recently attended your open homes. So it basically gives you a lot more power in terms of really cheaply targeting the audience that you're wanting to go after. And the big part, like I said before, is that all this traffic is being driven back to your web property, being used to advertise your brand. Even the listing ads that are paid for by the vendors are being used to advertise your brand and not the brands of REA and Domain. I mean, we've seen products come out from Domain and REA, some paid, some free, around social, but at the end of the day, those are pointing back to those websites, not yours.
So, Alex is right. You know, the industry's been crying out for something in the social space. We're constantly being told social advertising, social posting. And I guess Spoke really seems to have hit a strong need in the industry for something that really simply solves a lot of the problems around social media advertising in particular. So we launched Spoke at AREC, at the Australian Real Estate Conference, I think it was about 6 weeks ago now. And the response was extraordinary. We were absolutely mobbed at the stand. We were joking that we think it probably won AREC, which if there was a prize for the most interesting app. Hitch did really well as well. So Hitch was also launched at AREC. We've been testing Hitch in the market for a while. We're beta testing the product with about 50 agencies now, and we think that Hitch is an interesting play because we think it's a bit of a slower burn than Spoke. So Spoke is big bang, sort of a big win. Hitch is all about forming local relationships in your local markets. So we think that as those relationships start to form, as local mortgage brokers and local conveyancers start to come onto the platform, and agents kind of understand that there's this beautiful local network of service providers and referrals sort of forming, that's when we think we'll see the most sort of run with Hitch. Both products have, in their own way, had a really fantastic reception from the market. We're really excited to see what happens with them over the next 6-12 months.
With just to add to that, with Hitch, the people that we're getting engaging with that product the most so far are the ones who are currently doing referrals and kind of see how the platform can simplify their experience and streamline everything that's involved in it. We're also getting quite a lot of engagement from larger agencies and larger groups who are looking at ways to deploy this internally to try and simplify referral payments and the general referral process. We've had some interesting engagement from them, especially in terms of cross-department referrals. So if you've ever looked at the way that an agency manages referrals between their sales and property management departments, it's never good if it's done at all. So it's either done through spreadsheets or through emails or through whatever. And encouraging that referral process in a way that's transparent and meaningful has always been traditionally very, very difficult. So it's an interesting platform, I think, with a lot of use cases, both inside and outside the business for referral.
I was going to ask you both, actually, Alex and Anton, about AREC. Did you find it valuable? I can hear, obviously, that you did find it valuable. I'd be interested just to get your views, though, on where the value in a conference like AREC lives, because I think it's probably multi-layered and obviously at that one level in terms of speaking to the industry, that's where one of those layers is. But where the other value is for agents out there.
I think for agents new to the industry that haven't been to a conference like AREC before, it's absolutely extraordinary. It's fantastic. So it's incredibly uplifting. The quality of the caliber of the speakers is phenomenal. One of our major clients in the UK, and the UK is a market that's 2 or 3 times the size of Australia. one of our largest clients is sending their agents to AREC because they don't think there's a depth of conference quality in the UK that they can send their staff to. So they're sending them across to the Gold Coast next year. So we think that from a motivational standpoint, from new agents, if you haven't been to AREC, go. It's absolutely extraordinary. For agents that have been in the market for a while and principals, I guess there's a couple of things. Networking is a really key thing. And at the stands, you get exposure to some of the most senior people at the digital companies that are doing some really interesting things in the marketplace. And actually, not only the digital companies. So, if you want to talk to, I had a chat to Nigel, I think it's Nigel Dalton, the chief scientist at REA for a good hour. And we talked about where the industry was going, and that was fantastic. And those people are just there, they're there to have a chat, they're there to have a discussion, and you can really get some interesting insights into where these companies are going and what they're doing. And then again, I think as well for principals, if they take away one nugget of interesting information, those are the things that can really be transformative to their businesses. And with the market shifting as much as it is, and with things changing, any capacity to innovate and any capacity to do something new and different is going to be really valuable.
You make such a good point that at a conference like AREC, you've got all of these industry leaders all in one place at the same time. So when you're networking, you not just have the opportunity to do it, but you have the opportunity to talk to the leaders of the industry and get an idea of not only what they're doing well to sort of flesh out their success, but also, as you say, where the industries go, some of the new innovations. And so from a planning point of view, I suppose agents can put that into their drum and use that as information to plan ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's absolutely critical that if you want to innovate and if you want to be doing well, you need to be at these things. Go to as many conferences as you possibly can. And AREC is a really good example of one that their execution is fantastic. They've done really, really well there.
Now, Alex and Anton, one final question for you guys. We've talked around it a bit. Your move into the UK. Really interested in what's driven that out, what you're seeing over there, and also probably more importantly, or as importantly, what impact that has on the local market and what learnings come back from there. So let maybe just start with why the why. What's driving it? What's behind it?
So it's interesting. I mean, we were. I'll take the why, and I might let Alex talk into the benefits that will flow into the industry. We have looked at the UK market for a long time because it's a market that's very compatible. We probably have only started to, I guess, as a business, as the business has scaled, we've only really been in a position to look at that market effectively for the last 2 or 3 years. And as it's sort of always held a lot of interest, but we thought, okay, the time zone's a challenge. Adapting the product to a new market is a bit of a challenge. And there's a lot of risk that sort of runs with that. And it's interesting. The primary reason that we've accelerated, it's always been on the cards, along with other product releases. But the main thing that accelerated it was we were approached by Spicer Hart, who is sort of the leading independent agency group in the UK. They have 200 offices. They approached us because they thought that our product would bring something really new and innovative to them in their local market. REX has an open API, which even in Australia is quite novel. We have a sort of a diversity of functionality, and we also bring something in our product which is Australia's focus on customer service. Australia has a really strong focus on long-term prospecting and customer service that's not so strong in the UK. Now, what the UK brings is a really strong focus on efficiency. So their companies, their organisations tend to be larger, so their offices are smaller, but their offices tend to operate as branches. So an agency will have, a typical small agency will have 2 or 3 branches in their local area. So they'll have maybe 2 or 3 people in each branch, so maybe 10 staff, but they're multi-location and they'll typically centralise their administrative function. So they tend to be quite good at operating efficiently. They tend to be quite good at dealing with compliance points. They tend to be quite good at turning over contracts. They're very effective in the way that in getting the most out of their advertising because they don't have vendor paid advertising in the UK. All advertising is agency funded. So they've had to do some really interesting things to get the most bang for their buck. And the way that they advertise properties outside of the portals is quite interesting. I mean, the UK is an interesting market as well because we think there's a lot of room for cross-pollination between Australia and the UK in both directions. As well as that, I guess, in terms of the flow through, there's a lot of investment that's going into our product. And we're kind of a leader in the market. People tend to follow what we're doing in terms of functionality. So I'll let Alex talk into some of the things that we're kind of thinking, and I guess the broad themes of the things that we're going to be bringing back to Australia from the UK and from this relationship with Spice of Heart.
Yeah, I mean, I won't go into too much detail. I don't want to give too much away too quickly. But I think a lot of that cross-pollination, a lot of the features and functionality are kind of driven from those thematic differences. So within the UK, like Anton said, they've had to learn to be very efficient, both due to the fact that VPA doesn't really exist there as a thing, except for very premium properties, and the commission rates as a whole are significantly lower. So what that's kind of meant is that they've had to become extremely efficient in certain areas, and that's driven a lot of system creation and system optimization around self-service for clients. So self-service bookings into say attending open homes, and all of that kind of front of office interaction with clients is typically significantly better in the UK, largely driven entirely by systems and workflows. So that's kind of a key area that I think we're going to be focusing on in terms of improvements to our system generally. I mean, the other half of it is because Spice of Heart is a 200 office group, and it's not a 200 office franchise group, it's a 200 office corporate group, where kind of getting into a position where we're now needing to start to deal with significantly more complex enterprise features, enterprise requirements, and workflow optimization. So a lot of those themes you'll see starting to come back into the product, and it will kind of result in REX becoming significantly more sophisticated as a CRM tool and as a whole of office workflow optimization tool. So we've always talked about REX as a platform, and I think that's going to become truer than ever as we start shipping probably over, I think, 200 features we've got planned over the next 12 to 18 months. So it's a pretty exciting time for us.
I guess the thing to add to that is so Alex mentioned a couple of points. Workflow automation. I know there's some stuff happening around VoIP, the front office, so booking, self-service inspection bookings. In the UK, vendors will run their own inspections as well, which is quite interesting. So a lot of that, like innovation, will come into the product. So I guess one thing to balance out the fact that we're dealing with a corporate group, we're talking about sophistication and enterprise, that might not make a lot of sense for smaller, or might not instinctively make a lot of sense for smaller offices. But as with everything that we build into our product, what we will do is we will take that, I guess, that enterprise grade focus and simplify it down and make the same features that are available at scale to large companies available to small businesses in a way that they can use effectively and simply. That's probably a key thing. Is we're like as with tech in general, we're kind of democratizing those top level features and making them available for everyone, which is really exciting.
Anton and Alex, thanks very much for your insights. I mean, it's interesting to listen to you talk, and the words like innovation and cross-pollination and change and diversification come up over and over and over again, and we see that the industry is changing. It's really good to be talking to people that are sort of at the front end of that change and driving out some of the new initiatives that we'll see in the industry as we go forward. At REB here, we're always keen to keep abreast of things, as you know, and it'd be really good to get you guys back into the studio, back on the podcast in a little while, just to track these developments and talk about the game so far, and then add to it what new things you're seeing, and how the industry continues to evolve. So thanks very much again for your time and coming in. Really good to get your insights, both Anton and Alex.
Thanks, Tim.
Cheers.
Thanks, Tim.
Cheers. Now remember to follow us on all of the social media stuff, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. You can follow me too on Twitter at Timothy J. Neary if you'd like to do that. Remember, if you've enjoyed today's show, please leave us a 5-star review there on iTunes. It's the best way for new listeners to find us and for them to be across the great content that we're putting out here. Also, remember to follow us on realestatebusiness.com.au. Also, remember that realestatebusiness.com.au is where you'll find us. There's plenty of stories there on the business of real estate across the whole of Australia. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next week. Goodbye.